Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Pre-election, pollsters, pundits, and Republicans predicted a red wave, a red tsunami, a complete takeover of the House and Senate. But voters had a different idea, and the red wave turned into more of a red trickle, with many more Democrats being elected than expected. Up next on Another View, complete analysis of the 2022 midterm election results and thoughts on races still to be determined. Dr. Eric Claville and the award-winning Claville Report. That's coming up next on Another View, right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Republicans said the economy, inflation, and crime would be the issues that mattered to most voters. Democrats said the very existence of our democracy and abortion rights would be most important, and apparently both sides were kind of right, but more Democrats were elected to office than most expected. Our favorite political analyst is here from Norfolk State University, Dr. Eric Claville, and his award-winning Claville Report. How are you, Eric? It's been a while.
I'm doing great, Barbara. Great to be back on air.
Absolutely, even though I see you other places. Yeah. With your coverage. But, okay, let's start with your overall impression of what happened Tuesday night.
Yeah. So I think what happened again, we talked about the pollsters being wrong again. We also talked about how the media got it wrong again, and really not paying attention to the people, right? Mm-hmm. The other factor that played a major part in this, in all the races, especially the one here in the 2nd Congressional District from a national standpoint, was the redrawing of the lines, also known as redistricting. And so we see where that district became more conservative, and the 3rd Congressional District became actually more Democratic and more liberal because of the types of voters that were put in there. But we'll talk about that more later. Mm-hmm. But it also shows that 2024 really looks very good for the Democrats and the Democratic candidate if that Democratic candidate is Joe Biden running against former President Trump, or if that Democratic candidate is like a Gavin Newsom running against a Ron DeSantis.
So, and there's a whole lot of discussion over whether or not Joe Biden should run again.
Right.
But let's hold off on that for a minute. Let's figure out 2022 first, but I do want to get to that.
Absolutely.
To that point. Okay, so let's start in Virginia, since we're here. And audience, we're going to pretty much stick to more of the national level in our conversation today. But if you have questions about what happened locally also, please give us a call, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Okay, so what happened in the Loria Kiggins race? How much did Elena Loria's participation on the January 6th committee impact the outcome, and then how much was redistricting also an issue?
So let's start with the latter and move to the former. Redistricting and the redrawing of the lines. This was a topic that was actually covered quite a bit during the election time period. We saw where her district the lines moved and became more conservative. So the lines moved.
Pretty much cutting Norfolk out. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
And went
on the peninsula also.
Absolutely. Right? Mm-hmm. So you went under Norfolk, and you went under to more conservative areas like Suffolk, Alawite, things, places like that, Chesapeake, and then of course you swung more to the right or to the east of the peninsula, and you have what's called the outer area. Right?
Okay.
The Eastern Shore.
Okay.
So you have that representation now where those particular, and then of course, Congressional District 1 also became more conservative as well, which is why Congressman Whitman won very easily, and also Congressional District 3, which became very conservative, very Democratic or liberal, and that's why Congressman Scott won handily. But he's also, just very quickly about him, you're someone who's been reelected for his 16th term. Right, someone who was chairman of the Education and Labor Committee.
This is really hard to try to knock him off the throne right now.
Especially for someone who gets it, someone who is smart on policies, somebody that's connected to the community. You always see him, whether it's a church program, whether it's a dedication of a building, a street, whatever. He's there. He's walking.
And it's not always just the major, super big events either. He is there in the community, smaller events and everything else. Yeah.
And also creating, passing policy, economic policy that's smart and good for everybody. So hats off to his 16th term, doing great for the Commonwealth as a whole. But back to Elaine Luria, you now see where those voters that she relied on in the city of Norfolk, that area, more African-American voters, more Democratic voters, also white Democrats. She didn't have that luxury. So now you see where she had to compete for those conservative votes. And here's what happens there, right? Because I want to talk about Virginia Beach and its power structure and what we can see now in the next 4 years. So now you have someone who has participated on the J6 committee. And J6, the further time passes, the further it is removed from our thinking. Right. So it was a terrible day. It was an embarrassing day. It was one that our country will hang our head in shame because of what took place on that day. And it's something that we also have to deal with as relates to those conspiracy theories that have been debunked, but still continue. And we see it across the nation in the division of voting. But it's one where we don't think about it. And I said this on television, I'll say it again, the raging Cajun, James Claville, it's the economy. And of course he said it's the economy stupid, right? But it's the economy, and everybody's concerned about that. Everybody's concerned about that. Constitutional rights are second to that, right? But then hanging over our heads is really an underrumbling is the New World Order and how that's going to shape out in our competition with China and also what's happening in Europe between Russia, Ukraine, and how they're shaping.
So Luria, conceded, and
Absolutely.
Kiggins is coming in. What do you expect from her?
Well, let's talk about Virginia Beach now. So right now, Virginia Beach is the home of our current governor, the home of our current lieutenant governor, the home of our current attorney general, and now the home of our current congressional representative for the 2nd Congressional District. Okay.
Wow.
All right. Think about that.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. You're absolutely right.
Now, when you take a look at, and now keep in mind those lines were redrawn by a new committee that was voted by the voters in order to redraw lines for district, which was a good idea in theory, but I was against 100% because in theory it looks good, but in practice it's not. In other words, it's a citizens review committee which bypasses the legislature and go straight to the courts for appointment, right? And then, of course, if they can't reach an agreement, you have some other provisions that are there. I'm not going to go into it now. So it was all along, right? They wanted that district to be conservative in order to keep that stronghold there. So they did a great job. That strategy worked, right? And, of course, you make some provisions to bolster some other districts, right? And basically the plan was approved. And that's what we have for the next 10 years. But the vote was very close. When I say close, you're talking 14,000 votes, right? Maybe 15,000. In a presidential year, you're going to increase that amount of votes that were cast total. So there's an opportunity for someone to really challenge that district. Somebody, I think Elaine Luria can still challenge that district and I would actually probably encourage the Democratic Party to kind of look at that, right?
Well, redistricting also, though, played a role in not only Virginia, but clearly in Florida.
Absolutely.
That was a huge issue also. And in other parts of the country, some states have legislators
Yes.
who make the changes.
Absolutely.
You know, Virginia went to a citizens board, but even that was problematic because it was in the beginning not representative
Right.
of the citizens of Virginia, right?
Well, certain citizens of Virginia,
Certain
right?
citizens of Virginia.
but not population wise. Yeah. So
Okay. Let's go to Georgia.
okay.
Stacey Abrams
Yes.
lost again to
Yes.
Brian Kemp. Do you think that this is her last try for the governorship?
I think so. I don't think Georgia's ready for that right now. Ironically, I thought Virginia was ready previously, and there was a really big push by a lot of people to say let's have the first viable black female candidate run. And I think if that was the case, she probably would have won, whomever that may have been. But Georgia, I think Stacey Abrams is the right candidate, but I don't think Georgia is the right state for it right now.
So what do you think she'll do going forward?
Well, I think, Congress is great for her. Even the head of I even think I would even say possibly the head of the DNC. Yeah, I mean, she would.
So
really...
the point being, don't give up, Stacey.
Oh no, and look, she won't give up. I mean, each party knows who their stars are. They know who they can galvanize votes around, and Stacey Abrams can galvanize votes around the country for all women, especially women of color, and they know that that's a valuable voting base. So she'll be fine. I also think Congress is a great place for her as well. Not so much the Senate, but definitely in the House, and then eventually the Senate.
So
and also very quickly, a White House appointment would be great for her as well.
Still staying in Georgia, though.
Absolutely.
We have that Senate race once again. I guess my question about that is Georgia voters had to go through major hoops to be able to vote this time.
Right.
Do we think that same energy is going to be there for the runoff between Warnock and Herschel Walker?
It is. All eyes are going to be on this race. This is the only Senate race in the country that is up for grabs because of the runoff. The only one. Everybody else is just waiting for votes to be counted. When you look at Arizona, when you look at, I think it's Nevada and one other, but those races are pretty much.
Arizona and Nevada are still so there are 3 states. So basically, we had 3 senators out there, and at this point, it's 49 for Republicans and 48 for Democrats. Am I right?
No, actually, vice versa.
Is it vice versa?
Because they picked up. Well, actually, the number will shape out to be that, right? Because the Democrats actually they flipped Pennsylvania.
Right.
So they got Pennsylvania and they'll get Arizona, right? So the question is, will they also get, so they remain in power in the Senate. The question is, will they get Georgia and go over that as opposed to having a split and then having vice president? Absolutely. So, but when you talk about Georgia, I was talking with some friends and we were just kidding around about this, but can you imagine Herschel Walker as a U.S. Senator, right? And I'm just saying, not anybody can run, anybody can be elected, but that's when you look at the type of policies and the importance of what we have coming up in this very tight Senate. The state of Georgia, Alabama, they're putting a lot of sports heroes. Tommy Tuberville's in the Senate. I mean, Congress as well. I think the Senate. I mean, that's. I think going back, I think the party's got to look at who they're putting up, to run in these races, right? But this is going to be a tight race. The third candidate is not going to be in it, and I do think Raphael Warnock will.
So what is the message then since you brought up the independent, who had 2% of the vote? First of all, what was his message to get the 2%? And then secondly, what will Walker and Warnock have to do to convince those? Because it would seem to me those are the voters that they've got to get on their side one way or the other, or not.
Well, the key is get your base out. I mean, it's always good. I tell every candidate, get your base to the poll, make sure your base overperforms for you. Depending on what type of race that you're in, you'll win. And then you have to court other votes. I think in this situation, the people that voted for usually the third party or libertarian are those that are fed up with the 2-party system. And they're casting their vote for that person or that particular individual on the ballot because of that. Those individuals tend to not to vote when there's a runoff between the other two parties, right? Because they don't want to vote for them. And I get it. I understand it. However, I think the smart thing would do in this situation is one of the candidates, and I think the Democratic Party is probably better equipped to do it because libertarians and third parties tend to be more liberal than agree with the conservative, especially now. What's being deemed a constitutional conservative, which was also talked about in the news here in Virginia Beach and so forth. And then also the Trump conservatives, right? So if I was the Democratic Party, I would actually have that conversation, with the libertarians, say, hey, what are some of the issues that you're worried about? Give me your top 5. We'll take a look and see if we can work with 2 or 3 of those if you work with us to get your voters to vote for us.
So, and what about the fundraising? Was there enough in the war chest to to push this forward, or are they going to have to get out and try to raise a whole bunch of money in a very short amount of time?
The money's coming in. They don't have to raise it because of how important the seat is. So that's happening right now. And when we talk about money, I have a problem with, this is just me. Again, going back to Citizens United 2009, the U.S. Supreme Court case, I think one of the worst cases decided where now you can now donate as much money as you want from a blind pack, so somebody out of, and I just use this country as an example, somebody out of Saudi Arabia can support a candidate here in Virginia.
And you don't even know that's what's happening.
Yeah, and donate as many millions of dollars. The amount of money that was spent in these elections were in the billions, right? Across the country, right? A couple of $1 billion. That's a lot of money. Millions of dollars flowed into the Commonwealth, especially in the second congressional and other races. You will also have the most expensive race for Senate when it's all said and done in Georgia.
757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We're talking about the results of the 2022 midterm elections. Mark joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Mark. You're on the air.
Yeah, good afternoon. How you doing, Dr. Claville?
Hey, good to see you. Thank you.
Hey, good. Look, I just got over a school board race here in Norfolk, which was quite interesting in a couple aspects. One, we did a no money campaign, no signs, no nothing, and we came within 700 votes of winning it. But more important, I wanted to ask you, given your experience in the political arena, is it commonplace that a U.S. or sitting U.S. congressman would endorse a school board candidate? Many of my political friends are telling me on all different levels that they have never seen that before. And I just wanted to see if that is something that you have run into before.
Thank you for the question. Unless something is exclusively ruled out by the rule books, right? For example, you can't ask, churches can't campaign, candidates can't campaign in the churches because of 501c3. And you can pretty much do whatever you want. Right. All's fair in love, politics, and war.
I hadn't heard the politics part put in there, but you're right.
No, absolutely. Listen, let me tell you something. First of all, I respect anybody, that runs for office because in this day and time, everything is on the table, fair game. And you have to have, you've got to have just a body of armor. In a heart of armor, and you got to be like a duck, let it roll off because, depending on how competitive it is, they're coming for you, right? So to your point, I haven't seen it, but it's not anything that's unimaginable.
Okay, thanks, Mark, for the call. We appreciate that. Let's go on to Pennsylvania. Democratic candidate for governor won. The Democratic candidate for the Senate won. Surprise? No surprise?
It's I'm not surprised because when you look at what happened in Philadelphia, how Pennsylvania won the presidency for Biden, right? They actually pushed and moved it, that needle. So when you look at what's happening in Pennsylvania, it's not surprising at all. So we're looking at Pennsylvania now. They used to be a red state. It used to be, and it became purple. Now it's becoming reliably blue. And if you look at where we are here in the Mideast, right, you got Virginia, reliably blue. You got, of course, the district. You have Maryland. You have Delaware, and it's New Jersey. Now you've come up,
Yeah.
and Pennsylvania is now part of that group, along with the state of New York, right? And as you continue to go up to the East Coast, so Pennsylvania was that last state, that you kind of had hanging out there. So I think, and also because of the you look at the jobs that are flooding those areas. It's a lot of tech jobs. There's a lot of jobs that require a lot of education. There's a lot of jobs that require, and it's individuals that don't come from traditional settings, and they're moving around. They're exposed to a lot more, and they are willing to vote for these candidates that share, their views.
So, speaking of Maryland,
Yes,
my home state,
Wes Brown, absolutely.
Absolutely. He's the first, Maryland elects its first black governor.
Yes.
The third African-American governor ever elected in this country.
Yes.
What do you expect from Wes?
Maryland is that state, that is, again, it's shifting from blue to now liberal, right? So
From blue to liberal?
Well, when I say blue, I mean, when I say liberal, that's the extreme of the party, right?
Okay, got you.
Just like when I say from red to conservative.
To conservative,
right?
got you. Okay.
So or I'll just say Democratic and Republican and the extremes of those. But I think Maryland's becoming that state, of course, north of D.C., north of the district, where a lot of people, again, looking at these issues that are passing in the district and so forth, and wanting to see, those measures and policies pass. However, he's got a lot on his hands because, again, we talk about the economy. Maryland's pretty safe because it's more affordable, and I think that's a good idea to keep it more affordable for DC overflow.
Yeah.
Right? Trust me.
Yeah, because DC is not affordable.
And Northern Virginia is becoming unaffordable as well.
Exactly.
But so when you look at that, you're getting a lot of families. So now you have to look at public safety. You have to look at a lot of more services that are there. And you got to look at Baltimore. Baltimore is a major city. It's going through a lot. And it's really at that point where, and again, he's not the mayor, right?
Right.
But he does have influence. You got to look at making that city.
It'll be interesting to see if he has the same type of influence in Baltimore that Hogan had. Because, there was that push-pull that was going on between the mayor and the governor of Maryland.
That's a nice way to put it, Barbara.
I'm trying to be.
But definitely, to your point, though, I think he will. Because I think they share some common ground, right? So I think it'd be more of a partnership. So I'm very excited to see what Baltimore becomes and how they use that influence in order to kind of help to not really reshape Maryland, but to really push Maryland into a different direction. And then lastly, I say, look out for Wes Brown, future ticket, not 2024. But
might be too soon.
Yeah, but definitely 2028. Look out for that.
Wow. Okay, so there was a lot of history made on Tuesday night.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Arkansas, Massachusetts, and New York elected their first female governors. We now have an openly gay governor in Massachusetts, the youngest person ever elected to Congress from Florida. Vermont elected its first woman to Congress, and she's also the first openly gay person to represent that state. And Mark Wayne Mullen, a tribal citizen of the Cherokee Nation, won his bid for senator in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So he's the first Native American senator in nearly 2 decades, and the first Native American senator from Oklahoma in a century. So is this the wave of the future? Are we going to start seeing more of the diversity of our country actually in the halls of Congress?
I think it is. I think we're going to have to, right? Because of the democratic shift. And also you see individuals, African Americans, other people of color, that are now because of the opportunities. Again, access to opportunities is huge. So any policy that provides access to opportunities is a good thing, because what's happening now, these individuals are able to access opportunities that historically were not afforded to them, and only afforded to white males and then at the time also white females later, much later on. But they were now being able to afford these educational opportunities, business opportunities, things of that nature. You then access that community that intellectual and that business community, which then provides you access to capital, which then provides you access to individuals who are making policy, and then you decide, hey, I want to also be a part of this making policy. We see it here in the city of Newport News, where now you have the youngest African American mayor in the history of the
Commonwealth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, actually, Newport News. I'm not sure about the Commonwealth. I have to check that.
Okay.
But definitely Newport News, who, again, was part of the military academy and then access business after he was able to access Harvard, right? And then able to come and do, have aspirations and now in the seat in order to do good things. So it's very interesting. I was actually in my dentist's office this morning, which is actually the current mayor of the city. And, we were like, we're just talking. It was like, I congratulated him on his retirement. And he was like, what do you think? I said, well, we'll see, But it's a really good thing happening.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're taking a deep dive into the results of the 2022 midterm elections with political analyst Dr. Eric Claville from Norfolk State University. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Abortion rights played a major role in this year's election, with California, Michigan, Vermont voting to enshrine abortion protections in their state constitutions. And Kentucky voters rejected an amendment that would have said no right to the procedure at the state level. And the issue brought a lot of young voters to the polls. Right. Do you think that this will help them to continue to be engaged?
Absolutely. Anytime you have issues that are important to a certain demographics and you're going to create a message around it. I'm very interested to see what the investigation turns out, to see who actually leaked that decision in the Supreme Court. Yeah. Because that was very strategic in order to get that to help galvanize voters. Because if you think about it, the Democratic Party was kind of suffering with lackluster engagement and turnout after a lot of policies. I would say several policies were not were not effectuated in a timely manner that the constituencies it was aimed at wanted to be done. Case in point, student loan forgiveness. You also have the George Floyd crime bill, and then some other initiatives that were kind of being stalled or not acted upon at all. Now you have this issue, and of course, individuals who are in that age bracket where choice of birth is very important to them, and then you have individuals that probably no more in that age bracket, but they say, hey, this is an issue that is still important to me.
Because they're also looking at their daughters and their granddaughters and, and so forth. Marijuana also being legalized in Maryland, and I can't remember the other state that was up. So that continues. Also, another issue that a lot of young voters may or may not be interested in, right?
I think they are.
Oh gosh. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. And that is, well, first of all,
which one?
I know. Before we get to that elephant, let me talk about another one. If Republicans take over the House, if they do, and we still don't know yet, but it seems to be leaning that way at the moment. How do you think President Biden and Kevin McCarthy will work together, or will they?
No, they're not going to work together. It's just, especially coming up to the 2024 election. Now behind the scenes, this is how it works, right? So policies that are very important for the running of the country and the running of business of the country, business and banking, right? Those get passed. Not going to hit a blip, on the screen. They're not going to even make, it's going to be a procedural vote. It's done. You may get a few testimonies on it. Watch C-SPAN if you don't believe me. You'll see it, right? So what ends up happening is that those issues that are hot button, that are wedge creators, those are the issues that are going to be pushed into the public purview. Why? Because they're just looking at elections. Case in point, repeal and replace. Remember that mantra? Remember that?
Yes.
And then when they finally got in office, I never forget the press conference. Senator Mitch McConnell and had several other minority leaders behind him. They're like, what about repeal and replace? And he says, well, I don't think we're interested in that right now. We're going to move on. 9 years, right? You ran on that. And now you're like, we're good. So again, what are those issues that are going to cause a wedge? One thing I think you will see is that they're going to utilize his son and push the investigation up on him. So to the last caller was asked you, and I said all's fair in love, war, and politics. Everything's fair game. They're coming after him.
And that's another reason why, or is that another reason why there seems to be somewhat of a push to have Biden step aside the next time?
Possibly, but it's also the age factor, right?
Yeah.
And if you remember what kind of took place earlier in the administration, there were those that were saying, "Oh, Vice President Harris is going to, the next person, we're getting her ready to run." And there was a major pushback in the White House on that, and there was a lot of missteps, with handling certain issues on the vice president's office on her side. So if you've seen, she hasn't been visible a lot.
I noticed that.
Yeah, like I said, there were several missteps that were there, and then also, anytime you're wanting to take your boss's job, you're not going to get too much front camera.
Too much, absolutely. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Raphael joins us from Newport News. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for taking my call.
Uh-huh.
I was going to say that I was very, very impressed and proud of our nation for the way the elections went because, it's knowing our history, we can go from the Federalist takeover back in the Thomas Jefferson time to, who knows what. But we can be a nation that we may not have a lot of resources, but we are resourceful, and we can stay as one nation working together. And I'm very, very proud to be from the United States of America.
Okay, thanks so much for the call, Raphael. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel the way that he does.
I think there are quite a few. A lot of people, and I was at the polls, working, and I saw some, and just for an example, some older white Americans that voted for the young African American candidate who now is the governor-elect of Newport News, and you also
Mayor-elect.
Yeah, mayor-elect, absolutely, and then. Right. According to the current,
you're going to elevate him already. Let him get in the first office.
Absolutely. Like I said, according to my conversation with the current mayor, he was like 53 days, but who's counting? But yeah. So, and when you look at the results of what took place, going back to our discussion about different individuals from different parts of the country and backgrounds and so forth, yeah, that's the future. Because number one, we have to go there. Population trends tells us we have to go there, and then we're seeing it, and then people are willing to go there, and they're accepting that.
Okay, so I love having you on the show because you always do these forward predictions. But let's talk about the other elephant in the room. That's Mr. Trump.
The real elephant.
Yes, absolutely. Many of his endorsed candidates lost their elections, and the Republicans are fighting each other right now.
Yes, they are.
And tell me what's being said behind the scenes.
They want to move on from this. The traditional Republicans, they want to move on, from Trump, but he's not budging. And the problem with it is, and keep in mind, he's a great marketer, and he knows that he still has, at least in some areas, over 50% of party voters, and in other areas a little bit under 50%, around the 40 percentile, right? But when you have between 40 and 50% of a key demographic of voters, where are you going, right? So, but one of the things that he's going to have to deal with is right now the RNC is paying his legal bills, right? So that's if he doesn't. And
they have said that if he runs, they're not going to pay his bills anymore,
right? So you're going to look at indictments start to roll down next 18 months, right? Now, strategy-wise, if the Democratic Party is smart, they would say, hey, let's see if he runs. And then because the polls show that Biden beats Trump, right? The majority of the country don't want to do that again. They don't want that rewind. So what's going to happen is Biden will win. And the question is, do you hit him with indictments now? Or do you wait till he makes his announcement, get some steam, and then hit him with indictments then and start the ramping up of what those indictments will do? So as you start appearing in court after court, You know, that weighs on anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And you start hitting family members with those indictments as well, right? So those are the cards that are now being held behind the scenes. The GOP cards and from legal ramifications is Biden's son. So now the question becomes, even if he doesn't run, you know, what influence would he have destroy the viable candidates that will run? I mean, he's already given Ron DeSantis a glimpse.
He has, because he's already called him Ron DeSanctimonious.
Right.
And so he's already started with the name calling.
Absolutely.
And so forth. And I was listening to one of the pundits. They were saying that, you know, Ron is in his 40s.
Yep.
And whether or not he may think it's worth this time around, because he's still got years, you know, that where he can run for president. Why do you think, though, that Trump's people fail so spectacularly, considering that he's supposed to have all of this support in this base?
Well, again, it depends on what area they're in. For example,
let's take Pennsylvania. Let's take Oz, for example.
Okay. All right, Dr. Oz, television doctor, right? Again, got a television doctor run for Senate, had a viable chance of winning, and a former running back that took a lot of hits. He does got a chance of winning in Georgia. So I just want to put that out there. He had again, these are individuals that have popularity, right? Mm-hmm. These individuals that have a following, and they want and then voters want an alternative. Okay. So when you see that, you know, and some people take hold of that mantra, these two candidates actually did, right? They wrote the Trump mantra, and they got very, very, very close, extremely close. Okay, so that kind of shows you how close they are. Now, these individuals did not get shellacked in the elections, right?
Right.
They came very close. When you're less than 2%, that's very close. So I wouldn't, quote unquote, claim victory. You know, Trump has no influence. That's not true. Because in a midterm election, you had record turnout across the board. Now, imagine what he can do, you know, in the regular election. Now, you mentioned Governor DeSantis saying, "Hey, do you really want this? Do you really want this heat?" Right? And then you're also looking at other individuals that are looking to run.
Well, that's the thing, because
said, I don't want this heat either.
Because if you think about it, so you've got Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Larry Hogan. I mean, these are just people whose names have been, you know, kind of floating around in the atmosphere for a while. But I'm wondering, you know, would any of them, first of all, would the others step back if he, in fact, says, I'm going to be in there?
Absolutely, they will step back. I mean, nobody wants to go through that. You know, it's just not worth it. You know, it's too taxing, you know, having to do that and go through that. And, you know, hey, you know, those indictments might come out a little sooner if it's like, hey, guys, go and, you know, let's see what happens because of that, you know. But you know, it's a wild card. I can't really predict if he's going to say he's going to run. Right. I think
because he said he's going to make his announcement next week. However, his advisors are trying to get him to wait until after the Georgia runoff. Tell me why that makes a difference.
Well, it's going to make a difference because you're going to, number one, kind of fuel the Democratic side, right? They're going to be like, oh, look what's happening. Now we have to get him in there because now you say we don't want Trump again. So now Trump becomes the mantra as opposed to running against Herschel Walker, right? And they'll win if they do that, hands down. The other part of it is I think it works better in his favor because if he waits, because he'll have more of an advantage going into the holidays, right? So it could be a Christmas time announcement, right? A New Year's announcement. You know, he could really market that. You know, so next week, and of course, he probably said next week, but then he'll like, well, I'm waiting, you know, that type of thing. It just keep people on edge. It's kind of like, you know, the infomercial, you know, you can buy it now, but if you act now, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So Joey wrote us on Messenger. It says, I cannot help but to wonder if Elaine Luria didn't make a good enough appeal to the base of minority voters to show up at the polls Tuesday. And is that why she was defeated?
I would agree that also had a factor as well. You know, just understanding, you know, your voters, your demographics, getting your feet wet. Keep in mind, if you look at the history of this, but the redrawing of lines also impacted extremely, impacted her the turnout to a very large extent for the other candidate. But also, if you look at this district, it's been a ping pong, right?
Yeah.
It's going back and forth, Republican, Democrat in the last 4 cycles now, right? Scott Taylor, Lay Lure, Scott Taylor, Lay Lure, Jen Kiggins now, who, right? So this, again, it's just one of those districts that we're going to see the ball continue to move. I think the rest of the congressional districts are pretty fairly safe, especially I was looking at the Spanberger and the Wexton districts.
Now that's Northern Virginia, and Spanberger won.
She did, yeah. Yeah, the only seat that flipped, they were looking at 3. And when you talk about the red wave, they were looking at 3 to flip in the Commonwealth, but only 1 did. And that was the one here in Virginia Beach. So a lot of those districts didn't change a lot. The only ones that really changed a lot was Congressional District 2. And when you talk about 3, it, like I said, it just became more Democratic leaning than anything else. But really the one that changed, and that was the one that was able to flip.
So let's suppose Joe Biden decides to retire at the end of this term.
He's not going to do it.
I know he's not, but if he did, who would you say would step up to the plate?
Well, honestly, right now, 2024 is going to be the year where it's 2024 is going to be the year where the country chooses a new direction, right? Right now, all the old stalwarts of the party, either in the 70s or 80s, both sides. The Pelosi's, the Bidens, the Mitch McConnells, everybody. They're aging out, and others have retired, right, out of Congress. Out of Congress, or they've unfortunately passed away, right. So, what you see now in 2024 is a new direction being chosen. The question is, what do the parties want to present as their new direction? All right, I think DeSantis has a great chance of winning. I think him being reelected in Florida, the way he was reelected, that it was very convincing. I mean, and he did it in Florida.
But he was reelected also, Eric, because he redrew all the lines in his favor.
Yeah, I mean,
did he not?
Right. Well, in the congressional, right?
Yeah.
But keep in mind, as governor, it's those policies statewide.
Right.
The immigration issue really played very well, and the technique that they utilize in flying immigrants to northeastern states and seeing their reaction, I mean, that was very strategic. It played extremely well, got the clips that he wanted to get, got the result that he wanted to get. And then also just being that new face, right? Being of non, quote unquote, European American, but has, some non-European heritage behind him also plays very well. Being in a very diverse state such as Florida plays extremely well, and being an executive officer of a state for 4 years and now reelected plays extremely well. So I think that he is the face. I think he is that person that you really want to push. I think they also have to find a Republican female to run with them. I think that will also help to bring back especially white females and what I call micro minority females. That's your Asian Americans, that's your non-African American, Black Americans, those from other nations, and East Indian Americans, right? So those are individuals that you really want to pull into that direction. You can pull, right? The other side of it is, when you look at the Democratic Party, it's a huge party of constituents, right? You have your traditional voters and the most reliable voters in the Democratic Party, African Americans, right? However, that particular demographic is really becoming more fed up because a lot of their issues are being ignored, right?
They get the vote, but then nothing changes in terms of the policy that will help to better the lives of African Americans.
Absolutely. So because they're seen to be too aggressive, right? You don't want to seem to this or to that, right? So what ends up happening is that demographic is just getting older. So you have younger African Americans and young African American elected officials that are really voicing this. and they're pushing in a direction not so hard, but they are pulling. So now the question becomes, out of that demographics, also out of the issues of LGBTQI, out of the issues of other micro minorities in the country, the question becomes, who do you put up as your face? Is there enough room under the tent and the umbrella to be representative of that party and push policies for the country? I go back to, first of all, I think Gavin Newsom is a viable candidate.
Okay.
Also, when you look at a white female, Whitmer is a very good candidate for that vice president or presidential candidate. But I think Gavin Newsom actually pulls a lot more. He's from California, largest state in our union. Ron DeSantis is from Florida, the second largest state, I believe, in our union right now. Both are the most diverse states in our union. So I think those two head to head is a great race. I think it's a great future for both parties.
If Biden and DeSantis were the candidates, could Biden win?
I think he wins because I think the Democrats would not want a Republican in office. But I think that DeSantis would probably exploit his age. And I don't think that Biden would have as much control over his gaffes with DeSantis. And I think you'll get a lot more debates as well. The key for Biden to win is not to debate as much. If he debates Trump, he'll beat Trump easy, because nobody wants that rewind. Nobody wants to do that. Yeah. And Trump, he'll shoot himself in the foot, at that point. But moving forward, I think, if Trump doesn't run, I think the Democratic Party really has to think long and hard about that. But I think that he will run again, Biden, right now, as things are. But then it's 2 years a long way away. When you're in your 80s, that's, Yeah. I mean, he's doing a great job, don't get me wrong, but, Father Time is undefeated.
So what should voters be thinking about, looking at over these next 2 years as we enter into this next phase of leadership? What are some of the things that they need to be paying attention to so that we'll be ready to make an informed decision come 2024?
Number one, be prepared. We're going to get a blimp on the economic screen going into 2023. The world is preparing, banks are preparing. We're going to have a recession based upon what took place, during COVID, but also some things that we really had issues with that we really haven't dealt with. Nobody talks about the deficit anymore because nobody wants to really say what the deficit really is, but that is an issue. Okay, the United States and China, right, two of the world's biggest economies, and right now, the two superpowers. We have to pay attention to what's happening in China. We haven't been paying attention to the occupation of the world that China's been doing. They're colonizing the world all over again through economics and military bases and their soldiers. And they're creeping around the borders of U.S. territories in the United States. So we're looking at Great Britain again if we're looking at the United States. I think thirdly, Barbara, we have to ask ourselves, as far as the policies that you're looking at, we have to ask ourselves about education for our young citizens. Do we go with a European model where you're tracked at a certain time period? If you want to go into trade, we now push you into trades, which are great, right? Coming out of school, making $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 as an 18, 19-year-old. I think a lot of us probably would have taken that at that time. Do we go into what's called university track, go into studying at the university? Do we go into public service, such as military or as public safety and things of that nature? I think we really have to
So you're saying overseas they actually track people into those areas,
right?
While they're in school, so that there's a specific. They have a specific plan.
Well, right, and that's what used to happen years ago. Not sure what countries still do it, but I think it's a very good system where you now give individuals an opportunity when they leave K through 12. After 12, 13 years, you become a viable citizen that's contributing to your community and to our country, right? No matter what you want to do, you're respected across the board. But then lastly, we have to talk about constitutional rights, right? The Supreme Court is doing some very activist things, right?
What do you think about that? And I know we only got 4 minutes left, but affirmative action is probably going to be the next big one.
It is. And again, I think affirmative action has always gotten a bad rap because of the messaging that was placed around it by, the Republican and Conservative Party in order to create a wedge, right? Affirmative action, I believe the naming should have always been corrective action, right? Because you're correcting the wrongs through our country for a quarter of a millennium, 250 years plus another 100 years on top of that, right? So you're talking 350 years of lack of access and blocking access to opportunities, viable opportunities of education, economics, and ownership and capital because you could, right? And then you have 50 years right now, right at 60, of correcting that and providing access.
But now they want to take that away again.
Of course. I mean, when you're used to getting 100% of the pie and you don't care who gets the crumbs, unless you start getting fat off the crumbs, and now you had to start giving up, 1% of the pie to maybe 10% of the pie, it's just human nature, right? So you have to battle against human nature and go toward human good.
Last thing, in the last 2 minutes we have, Russia.
Yeah. For me, I think it's a shame that the world is allowing this man to cause havoc, bring nothing but destruction and really hell to a lot of people that don't deserve it, right? I think it's an absolute shame. Absolute shame. I think the world should be ashamed of themselves. This is 2022. Yeah. This is not the way anymore. The world wars, we fought those, and we thought that we were done. So with that, I think a lot of people feel that way. When you see the death, the destruction, it's an absolute shame on the world. I think he has to be set down. I think they have to really have that conversation and say, listen, you've got to stop. You have to stop. But will they? No, they will not.
But why? I mean, if you got the whole rest of the world, or a good portion of it anyway. I know China is more on that side, but if you've got the rest of the world, why not sit him down and make him and make him do something different?
Well, Barbara, unfortunately, when you have the support of individuals who are supporting you, and you don't have to worry about everybody else, you tend to do what you want. You're in a silo. But the other part of this, the last few seconds, is that unfortunately, in our society, world society, there are individuals within our communities, first of all, in our families, our communities, our countries, and the world that we have labeled expendable. And unfortunately, these people are been labeled expendable. We do it in our country. There are people in our country, African American labor expendable, and so forth. So, and what we call, or the nice political word is marginalized.
Marginalized,
right?
Exactly.
So that, unfortunately, that's who they are. We pray for those, but hopefully the policy will follow prayer, and we get results.
Dr. Eric Claville, as always, we so appreciate your insight and your perspective. Thank you so very much for being with us. And every election, it's proven time and time again, your vote matters. It's important for all of us to pay attention to the actions of our political leaders. We've given them our vote, and now we must hold them accountable in keeping their campaign promises. Please share this show with a friend. Go to anotherviewradio.org and download the podcast. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. I'm on Another View is on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week on Another View, a really fun show with jazz great and foodie Jay Sennett. He's got some recipes for some delicious Thanksgiving and holiday dishes, so you don't want to miss that. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Make it a great weekend, everyone. And to all of our veterans, thank you for your service as we celebrate Veterans Day tomorrow. We'll see you next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.